economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Friday weekend edition. We're so grateful that you can join us. And over the next 2 hours, we will be covering a lot of issues. Certainly, one of the things I always love to do is remind people about what it used to be like Penna Dexter back in the old days when we would come to December. Oftentimes, Congress would be excused. Supreme Court maybe wasn't really dealing with issues. We sometimes talked about doing a Point of View home and garden show. I was just making a long mental list of all things we're not going to talk about today. We won't talk about the war in Ukraine. We won't talk about the conflict in the Middle East. There's all sorts of conflict taking place in South Korea, which we'll get to next week, and also in France. We won't probably talk much about some of the nominees that Donald Trump has put forward, although maybe one gets mentioned. Those are all off the table, and you're still going to be, in the next 2 hours, talking about everything from religious liberty to DEI to a variety of other topics. And it's just a reminder that the old days when December was a time when we could reflect on maybe doing a program on who were the three wise men or when actually was Jesus born. We're in the midst of a lot of busy activity right now, aren't we?
Yes, and part of it has to do with the fact that the president-elect did not let any grass grow under his feet after he was elected. And he got started forming his new administration. I know we're not going to talk about nominee after nominee after nominee for the cabinet, but it's impressive. It's actually impressive to see the ground that has been laid to get ready to sort of hit the ground running in January.
Might just mention, too, we do have a piece by Guy Benson, which you can see, that gives you a rating on how the American people feel about some of these nominees. And I'll just give you a spoiler alert. The American people are much more positive than some of the people around Capitol Hill. But we bring back to the microphone Keisha Russell, who is senior counsel for First Liberty, and we're going to be talking about a lot of legal issues, so I couldn't even imagine doing this without you, Keisha. And, of course, you have spent some time working with Judge Ho. Can you explain a little bit about what you've been doing?
Yeah, so last year I had the opportunity to clerk for Judge Ho on the Fifth Circuit, who is also on the short list for Supreme Court Justice. And so learned a lot from him and definitely polished my legal skills, writing, drafting, all of that, because he's just such a brilliant writer, thinker, and amazing person.
Well, speaking of writing, you were writing before that, and now the fruit of all that writing is available, and I guess I can just basically hold this up.
There it is, yes. Uncommon
This is
Courage.
Keisha's new book. It comes out January 21st. But we have a copy of it. It's called... This was my copy. Thank you, Keisha, for bringing it in. Uncommon Courage, Defending Truth and Freedom While There Is Still Time. And, of course, she draws on her experiences at First Liberty Institute and in the field of religious liberty law. So thank you, Keisha, for my copy of the book. And we'll certainly go more deeply into this as the date for launching draws near.
And you got a number of people that have endorsed the book, and of course I've had a chance to get a glimpse at it as well, so I think you will appreciate that. But let's get into it, because our first article is New York school denies student request to form an official Bible club. Now, it seems to me that if you say, well, we should have, and they do have, a gay-straight alliance, you should also then be allowed to have a Bible club. If you have a ski club or a chess club or a debate club, you should have a Bible club. But apparently, Keisha, New York, at least this school, didn't get the memo, did they?
No, they didn't. And so, we, on behalf of the client named Elijah Nelson, who was an amazing 13-year-old middle schooler in New York, we sent a letter, and I just want to say that we were able to send that in conjunction with our co-counsel at Jones Day Law Firm, which is an amazing international law firm with just some really bright lawyers. And Kevin Marshall was on our team, another guy named Michael Bradley, who's an associate on the case. And we sent a fantastic letter to the school telling them that if you have these extracurricular clubs, you've got to have religious clubs. You're not allowed to discriminate based on the Equal Access Act and the very stringent requirements under the Free Exercise Clause. And it just so happens that, the school district was pretty sure about their position, I guess, until they start getting phone calls from Fox News and the Daily Caller and national people who were interested in hearing about why the school would do this. And the school has reversed its position and said, oh, yes, of course you guys are right, and we're going to try and have this student have this club. But if I may, just say that a lot of times in these cases, what I find is that some of the administrators actually do know the law. And they do know that there's supposed to be a Bible club, and they do know that there's supposed to be a Christian club, and they deny it because they think, well, what is that student going to do about it? And so that's why when you illuminate that darkness, meaning sending a letter and doing a press release, that allows you to broadcast that, and then the school has to do the right thing. They're forced to because they're under a microscope.
When I see something like this, and you mentioned the Equal Access Amendment Act, I did think this type of thing was settled back in the 80s. Why do they keep denying these clubs?
I can't really say for sure, but my guess is that the country has spent, I think, like the last couple of decades, really reinforcing the fallacy that the separation of church and state means we have to get rid of religion. We have to completely ostracize religion from society, essentially. And I think a lot of government officials and especially schools have adopted that view. And I also think there's some hostility there just towards religion, toward Christianity specifically. And a lot of times you may have ignorance, but I also think that sometimes these people do know. And they think, no, we don't need to have one of those clubs. And so we're just going to say no. And for every Elijah, right, that sticks up for himself, how many other students do you think will just retreat after the school says no? Most of them. Mm-hmm. And so that's why we do what we do, because we want some of those other students who may not be able to have access to someone to ask to know that they have the right to do this.
Yeah. And so, First Liberty has written this letter. Sometimes that's all it takes.
Yeah, sometimes that is all it takes. And some of these kinds of cases like these, I wouldn't call them small or even less significant than, say, our Coach Kennedy case. It's just as important, right? Because we are fully willing to sue on behalf of the student in order for him to have this club. But the point is even bigger than just this club and this student. It's just the fact that we have to continue to enforce the protections of the Constitution when it comes to religion. Otherwise, we won't have them anymore, right? So we have to keep doing that. And that's why we do what we do at First Liberty.
As you said, Penna, 40 years ago, the Equal Access Act was passed, and here we're still dealing with it in 2024 as we get into 2025. Let's take a break, though. We have another case. This one's a little more disappointing, which we'll talk about in terms of what is happening in the state of Ohio. But if you'd like to know more about this particular case, or maybe you know a young person who wanted to have a Bible club and was told no, this piece could be very helpful. The letter that they sent could be very helpful. So it's the first article we've posted right here on the website at pointofview.net. We'll take.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
The Western world is facing a birth rate crisis. Wilfred Riley says that these young adults resemble captive panda bears who must be persuaded to mate. He cites a psychological study that revealed that roughly 50% of young men have never or almost never approached a woman to ask for a date. Even if men and women get married, they are less likely to have children. The fertility rate has been dropping for decades. That is why Edward Ring wrote a discouraging essay, Give Me Fertility or Give Me Death. Turns out that unmarried, childless women are much more likely to vote for a Democratic candidate who supports abortion as reproductive health care. And a recent study by Morgan Stanley estimated that by 2030, around 45% of women between ages 25 and 44 are projected to be single and childless. And it's more important to recognize that these trends are not only taking place in the developed world, but much more even in the developing world. The U.S. has a fertility rate of 1.84, which is better than the 1.24 fertility rate of European countries like Italy or the 1.17 fertility rate of Singapore. Some liberal women have embraced the 4B movement that originated in South Korea that says no to sex, dating, marriage, and children. This is not a good trend. The projected fertility rate of South Korean women this year has dropped to 0.68. The population of South Korea is imploding. So it's time for pastors and other church leaders to remind Christians that children are a gift from God, Psalm 127, and they are arrows in our quiver. You know, the secular world may not value marriage and family, which is why the church must teach biblical principles to the next generation. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on a biblical view of anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism. Viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation at any point, 1-800-351-1212. In studio with us today, Penna Dexter. Keisha Russell is the Senior Counsel for First Liberty. And Penna, I thought it would be good to talk about a case that many people have been following for, it seems like, at least a year or two in Ohio at a time when it is so cold in the Midwest. I think you can give us an update on some of the things that are happening there.
Well, we've talked about Dad's Place, and basically it's a church that has a homeless ministry. They take in homeless. They're open to people that need the shelter and need to come in. And, of course, you know, then there's ministry going on to these people. And they have had so much trouble with the city authorities over and over again. It's been a battle that First Liberty has been involved in with them. And, you know, one would think that there would be a successful outcome at some point, and sometimes there are little steps in the right direction, but there was such a disappointing phone call that Jeremy Dyes at First Liberty got yesterday. I saw a little short video that he made about it, and he basically said it's freezing cold out here, and the people who would have been inside warm, who have nowhere to go, are going to have to be out on the street because of a decision the city has made.
Yeah, it's really disheartening, and I don't understand the justification for doing this to a ministry who is only trying to help the city care for the homeless and the people who don't have anywhere to go when it's clearly freezing outside. Sadly, this is not the first time we've seen cases like this where you have ministries. We had one in Dallas that had a very similar situation, and it was Our Calling, I think was the name of that ministry, and a very similar situation where they wanted to house the homeless and help
I've been in their
people.
Facility. I know the people that started it. Yes, they started it at Northwest Bible Church. Matter of fact, are tied into Dallas Seminary. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, so that was a couple years ago, and it's the same nonsense. You know, in that situation, I think the city essentially created an ordinance to keep this ministry from doing what they need to do, right? And so, I have a lot of compassion for what these ministries are doing, and that's why First Liberty continues to fight these cases, because these are the kinds of things that happen that no one finds out about. And these are the kinds of things people need to know about, because these are the things we need to be shouting from the rooftop.
So it's Pastor Chris Avell, is it?
Yeah.
And he's so he's strong and he fights back. He's willing to continue this fight, but he's also very, very. He just has a pastor's heart and very compassionate. And when these people are in need, what's the next step, Keisha, for this ministry? Do you give up?
Oh no, of course not. I think. I'm not directly on that litigation team, but I can tell you that we're going to keep fighting until we win. That's what we always do. So if that means we have to appeal, whatever it is, that's what we're doing. And we're going to, stick with Dad's place until we can get that ministry free to do what God has asked them to do.
Let me broaden it for just a minute. If you go to firstliberty.org, you can click on the picture of Keisha and find it, or just go to First Liberty. You'll see one of the things that pops up says criminalizing compassion, America's pastors and churches. And I wanted to broaden it for just a minute because we were talking about Pastor Chris, who is in Ohio, and he's been criminally charged. Think about this for a minute. This is not a constitutional issue. This is a criminal issue.
Right.
Criminally charged for providing a safe place for the town's most vulnerable people right now, when the temperature one day was 20 degrees there in Ohio, and our listeners up in Ohio can say, yeah, I agree with that. And then you also have Pastor Jose. We've talked about him before. Matter of fact, he has been pressured to end his food ministry where he's been feeding the hungry. Then you have Pastor Howard, who's been prevented from hosting these religious gatherings on his own property. I believe that one's up in New York again, I think. And then Pastor Mike, who's been canceled for providing temporary and emergency shelter for some of the homeless. By the way, are we seeing a trend here? And it is just an illustration that every time the church tries to be the church, Penna, what happens is they get drug into court, or they get cited, they get fined, and it's one of the reasons why I think people should support First Liberty.
Well, I think so. It's truly a compassion ministry. I just wonder some of the motivation. Is it that these city officials want a different church there, one that has like this beautiful property and all kinds of kids on a playground outside looking like all happy, and ignoring the fact that in our society, in our culture, everybody is not doing well. And that's why God has motivated many people to serve him in this way. But, it's like the society wants to define and narrow the parameters of what a church is. That's what I feel like this is about. Do they want to wipe out the church? Well, they would never say that. But I think on this particular case with Dad's place, I do think the authorities would probably rather see the church not there at all.
That's what it seems like to me. And in the past, I think it kind of gels with what we've experienced at First Liberty with sort of these local zoning boards, city councils, and things like that, and realizing that, well, obviously we know we're not fighting against flesh and blood, right? Mm-hmm. This is a spiritual thing. And for whatever reason, this animosity has built up within these people that they want to take the church out of government life, civic life. And I also think not only does it mean that they don't want the church there at all, I think they're trying to water down the church's influence in that area, because obviously if a church is helping people, feeding people, housing people, you have a very different view of that church rather than when you hear, oh, these Christians believe this or that. When you see the Christians walking out Christ's mission, it's very difficult to not understand that what they're doing is a good thing at the very least. And so I think
maybe to be drawn to the church or being drawn to Christ.
Exactly. And including the people that they're helping. So I think there are a number of reasons, but I think primarily it's a spiritual thing going on with some of these people, and it's just the hostility to just really water down the influence of the church.
Well, it's another reason why we need to have Uncommon Courage. That's the title of the book coming out, right?
It
That'd be good to do that. To maybe broaden it even broader, I was talking about these different pastors, change it to immigration. We're not going to talk about immigration today, but you noticed how there were people that said, we want to be a sanctuary city, we want to be a sanctuary state, until they showed up on their doorstep. The same thing. We think it's great that you have a homeless ministry, just don't have it downtown, because we don't want those kind of people there. And again, I think the church has the possibility of getting people not only off the street, but off the welfare rolls. And so in some respects, I recognize that if you just have a homeless ministry, which only does feed the people, give them soup, you're going to get more of that. And I can see why some church fathers and city fathers and others go, I don't know if I want to even do that ministry. But if your ultimate goal, as I think Chris has got, is to not only help people, not only giving them a hand up, but a hand, so he's not giving a hand out, he's giving them a hand up, really making a difference, then I would think that people in the city would say, great, we get people off of the streets onto the job roles. Those are people that are going to be paying taxes and make the city better, but they don't see that in terms of the long-term impact that a church can have.
I think there's one more part of this, and that is a lot of cities are actually controlled by the left. And the left likes to have people dependent upon them because they think that it keeps them in power. So, many of our national problems sort of come down to power, a power struggle. I think that's very true in cities. And, you look across the nation and you look at who votes to the right and who votes to the left. The areas are usually metropolitan, where you see the blue areas of the country. And it's much smaller geographically than the red areas, but it's filled with people and much more densely populated. And so, I wonder now, as we have a whole new kind of mindset in the country, at least in our government, and possibly it would be a bully pulpit, to move things out to religious care for people, and where they can also get the spiritual help in addition to the physical help.
Well, I'll also say that the church has been caring for the communities before the government was, right? That has always been the case. So even when you look at a case like Fulton versus Philadelphia about adoptions, and they're telling these Catholics they must certify same-sex couples if they want to continue being in adoption in Philadelphia. That ministry was doing adoption before the government was. They were the ones who were helping foster children.
Very true.
And it's the same with these ministries. The church has always helped the people in need in their communities. And the government, whether they want to admit it or not, has always been dependent on the church's ability to do that.
As a matter of fact, we have an article coming out in the future just talking about the fact that if you tried to estimate the amount of positive impact that churches have economically, it's really off the charts. It allows the government not to have to spend as much money. Anyway, we're going to take a break, and we're going to get into this issue of transgenderism and the Supreme Court case right after this.
It almost seems like we live in a different world from many people in positions of authority. They say men can be women and women men. People are prosecuted differently or not at all, depending on their politics. Criminals are more valued and rewarded than law-abiding citizens. It's so overwhelming, so demoralizing. You feel like giving up. But we can't. We shouldn't. We must not. As Winston Churchill said to Britain in the darkest days of World War II, never give in, never give in, never, 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 never yield to force, never yield to the apparently overwhelming might of the enemy. And that's what we say to you today. This is not a time to give in, but to step up and join Point of View in providing clarity in the chaos. We can't do it alone, but together, with God's help, we will overcome the darkness. Invest in biblical clarity today at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition in studio with us today, Penna Dexter and Keisha Russell. And I might just mention the next 3 articles you can find on our website. One that comes from the editors of the Wall Street Journal. The Supreme Court should rule that reality exists. That probably tells you all that you need to know. One by James Lynch on the whole issue of the back and forth between Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito and the Solicitor General on some of the trans procedures. And then one we'll get to a little bit later, Noah Rothman saying, it is really time to stop calling it gender-affirming care. But let me just start with this one. I'll come to Penna, and then, of course, I want to get some of the legal analysis we'll get from Keisha. But the editors put it this way. The case rests on whether or not the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause is violated by a Tennessee law that restricts the use of puberty blockers and hormones by minors. They say, to begin with the obvious, the 14th Amendment says nothing of the sort, and they go on to say, it's hard to believe that there in the 19th century during the Victorian age, they even thought that this could be used in any way to actually give children the right to actually take drugs to irreversibly change their bodies. And again, if you haven't received this booklet that we've made available in the past on a biblical point of view on transgenderism, it takes you through some of the issues, cites Ryan Anderson, Abigail Schreier, and many others that have been on the program. But Penna, this is a case that was argued on Wednesday. It has very significant implications, not just for Tennessee. As I've heard, there's about 24 plus states that actually have similar restrictions. And so there's a lot at stake on how the Supreme Court rules in this case.
Yes, a state should have the right to protect children from something like this. And it's amazing to listen to some. I didn't listen to all the oral arguments, but I listened and read about some of them. And it is interesting. For one thing, I think we do know about this case, and that is this case is not going to tell us whether these surgeries are going to be able to take place, whether the kids are going to be able to be given puberty blockers. This sort of has to do of setting the tone and setting the legal rules of the game to get it, I guess, back down to lower courts again and move it back up. So, there's a lot of new ground to be laid in a sense. And when you look at the Equal Protection Clause, you have to look at the characteristics of the people that are being considered here. And Alito did that in these arguments. He asked the Attorney General, I think it was, or was it the ACLU attorney, whether these traits were immutable or not. Is transgenderism, is this immutable? Or is this something like you used to claim with LGBT, that it can't be changed, I'm born with it? Which is it? What do you want? So it's just a very interesting case, and I think it's so important right now. And when you have people that think that you're crazy if you don't buy into the whole trans ability to change your sex, then you lose some of your arguments. You lose some of the ability to argue correctly.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's so ridiculous. Equal protection has nothing to do with this Tennessee law, but it's the best they can do, right? So the ACLU has no other argument. There's no reason why the government cannot ban these surgeries. And so the ACLU has to make this a constitutional issue in order to try and, throw a bone because they really can't win this case. Equal protection, obviously, race and sex classification get heightened scrutiny. But something like an age restriction, which is what this is you have to be 18 to do these things. And we have laws dozens and dozens of laws like that. You only need a rational basis for that. And it's obviously rational to not allow children to have these kinds of procedures before they're old enough to understand the impact that it's going to have on their lives and their bodies. And so I predict the Supreme Court is going to do the right thing here. But I have to tell you that, Justice Gorsuch did, he's the one that gave us Bostock. So you have to remember that in his mind, some of these issues are very much interrelated. However, this is more about states' rights than it is about the transgender movement in general, the legal aspect of the case anyway.
I heard he was very quiet during the arguments, Gorsuch.
Yeah, I don't recall him saying very much, actually. I do remember a very interesting argument from Justice Brown Jackson.
I was wondering, that was my next question. Ketanji Brown Jackson, and relating it to the whole issue of interracial marriage in the state of Virginia. Go ahead.
Okay, so here's what so the comparison between interracial marriage, the bans on interracial marriage, and the ban on minorities getting these life-altering procedures. I think what she's trying to say is, okay, so the Tennessee is arguing this is not discrimination between sexes because neither boys nor girls under 18 can get this. What she's saying is, well, when they banned interracial marriage, neither blacks nor whites could marry each other. Does that mean that it's not a ban on race? But we know the intent behind that kind of statute is maintaining a caste system, right? So if you say you can't marry this kind of person, it's really just saying because you're not good enough, or racially there's a supremacy there, right? This has nothing to do with supremacy. This is not keeping up with some sort of caste system. But she's got to ask it. Why? Because this is the argument that this group always uses. They always compare
everything's
the
race.
Sexual revolution to the sort of civil rights movement and things like that. And they are not at all in any way the same.
Well, it's the assumption that the freedoms, quote unquote, freedoms that the sexual revolution gives are equal to equality for the races. And they're not equivalent. You can't put them on the same plane. I thought it was interesting too that this particular Supreme Court Justice, Ketanji Brown Jackson, at one point when she was confirmed, couldn't even define what a woman was.
Yeah, well, and I ended up testifying in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee against her nomination because of her belief system. Because I don't believe someone who thinks the way she does, who embraces critical race theory and all these things, should be on the bench deciding cases like this. And I think her line of questioning really demonstrates her state of mind about these issues. And obviously, she has an allegiance to these groups because what educated judge and lawyer can't define a woman. Of course you can define it. You don't want to define it because it's going to get you in trouble with the ideologues.
Says everything. You were talking about the sexual revolution. I held up this booklet the other day on sex and culture because a lot of this comes from a very good book by Carl Trueman in which he talks about the rise and triumph of the modern self and the whole sexual revolution. And his argument is this: once you give ground to LGB, then T is the next one to come. And that is, once you say, well, we can't really define male and female in marriage, then you can't define male and female. And so in some respects, the two come together. But Penn, I was thinking about something else you and I have written about, and that is, you remember the old days when President Barack Obama said, why can't we be more like Europe? Well, let's think about this for just a minute, because our second article reminds us, and Justice Alito reminded us this as well, that extensive research from European countries shows that, if anything, these transgender treatments are really harmful, and what few benefits that were talked about on Wednesday are very few, because the treatments and the risks far outweigh the benefits. And you can go even to a Swedish medical board. You can go to the classic case, I guess, of the Cass review in the United Kingdom. Most of these countries in Europe are saying this is a really bad idea, and the United States needs to listen to that.
They've closed the Tavistock Clinic in London. It was the only clinic to get these surgeries, and they opted to completely close that. And the Cass report was huge. I think it came out like a year ago, or maybe a little over a year ago, but they did extensive research and found that, number one, there weren't any of the positive results, and that especially suicide thoughts and all of that, parents were threatened. And a lot of these detrans people are now saying their parents were actually told that they would commit suicide if you didn't give them this care. And that's, now with the detransitioners coming out, that's proving to be wrong. But the other side of it is these surgeries. I saw a video that was put out by this doctor. She was one of the frontline doctors during the COVID years, and This was so graphic because it showed exactly what's done in these surgeries. Maybe not the exact surgery, but the aftermath with the stitches and everything.
I've seen that. And it's not recommended for the faint-hearted.
It's not recommended for the faint of heart.
Oh, my goodness.
And, for any parent to say, out of compassion, I'm going to allow my 11-year-old boy to have this. It's not compassion. If parents want the best for their children, they should definitely be finding another way to deal with their psychological problems than this type of thing.
Let me take a break because I know Keisha has a lot more to say. I mentioned, didn't you file a brief on this case?
We did.
Yeah, we'll come back and get some perspective on that. Transgenderism on the topic at the moment. Haven't even talked about how to address the issue of gender-affirming care, so we'll talk about that right after these important messages.
The troubled Boeing company got a new CEO in August. Early on, Kelly Ortberg began winding down DEI at Boeing. DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, has been around for decades. Diversity requires the elevation of immutable differences like race, age, ethnicity, religion, gender, and sexual orientation. Equity, often mistaken for equal opportunity, emphasizes equal outcomes. In favor of achieving these, employee merit is necessarily de-emphasized, and therein lies the seed of DEI's failure. After the death of George Floyd in 2020, Fortune 500 companies launched or beefed up their DEI initiatives. But when companies that build things take their eye off the ball, quality suffers. For Boeing, 2024 brought massive problems, including the mid-air separation of a panel from an Alaska Airlines plane. A Boeing insider told documentary filmmaker and writer Christopher Rufo an organization can prioritize excellence or diversity, but not both simultaneously. That's why Kelly Ortberg quietly dismantled Boeing's DEI department. Another American corporate giant, the country's #1 employer, Walmart, announced it is abandoning DEI. The Washington Stand reports that when DEI warrior Robbie Starbuck began investigating Walmart's policies, company executives reached out to him. The company has announced it will no longer participate in the Human Rights Campaign's LGBT Shakedown campaign, the Corporate Equality Index. It pledged to remove inappropriate sexual and/or transgender products and to cancel racial equity initiatives. Walmart joins a growing list of companies rejecting DEI. American businesses are realizing that the woke DEI agenda is polarizing and stifling for businesses. Some are choosing to return to simply running a business. Chris Rufo affirms a reckoning is underway in corporate America. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, of course, in some respects, we're talking about issues that go back decades. I pulled out a little booklet here on same-sex marriage. Of course, we have one on sex and culture, one on transgenderism. But back to this, Keisha, it's all part of the same. It does seem to me that once you can redefine whether or not a husband and a wife can exist, male and female, one man, one woman marriage, and you say that doesn't matter, then you get to the point where it says, well, the genders don't matter. And we find ourselves today being told that the only compassionate thing to do is allow young children who oftentimes are very confused about their sexuality to be able to choose these hormones and these surgeries, which are irreversible.
Absolutely, and it's extremely harmful for children. We are not supposed to be talking to children about sex in any form. That is child abuse. So, and we know this from the data. I mean, it's not old. It's not new information. We've always known this. And our First Liberty filed an amicus brief in the Scarametti case. And our client was a woman named Abby Martinez, who was a single mother in California. Her very young daughter, who was about 14, was socially transitioned without her permission or knowledge. And then the state basically took the daughter away when Abby refused to affirm medical transition for this girl. That means giving her puberty blockers. And this is, you'll find, is the tactic that a lot of states will use. So we wrote in our amicus brief that these kinds of laws, like in Tennessee, will prevent this situation because the state can't take a parent's child away from them for not affirming gender when it's not allowed for you to medically transition your child anyways. So that's part of the reason why we did that. But the other part is because we know that this issue is not going to go away. And it's important for us to stay in the conversation and in the fight and be able to connect this to the religious arguments and the values that we've developed in our country.
Yeah, the religious argument is God created man and woman, and that the institution of marriage is based on that biblically. And so if you wipe out the institution of marriage and change it, because there's a requirement, in Christian doctrine that it be a man and a woman to marry. And so we've already gone there. We've already gone there. So it's hard for us to argue. But there was another argument based on discrimination because of one's sex that I thought was interesting in this case, because they're saying if you give testosterone to a boy to help him out with some issues that he has, it's a medical prescription, then why can't you give it to a girl for another reason? And the other reason would be for her to become male, or to at least try to become male. And also if you give estrogen to a girl to help her out with her menstrual cycle or whatever, then why can't you give it to a boy to allow him to? It's just the purpose of the medication, and they're saying you can't have a different opinion simply because of the purpose, the medical purpose, but you can.
Well, you're supposed to have a different opinion because of the medical purpose, right? Like the doctors, the with the mantra "do no harm," right? You're supposed to, if you have healthy breasts, why is the doctor cutting this off from a teenager? No, that's not what doctors are supposed to do. If something is wrong, then you deal with it. And psychological, issues are not the same thing as medical issues, and we cannot always deal with those things the same. Yeah. And physically altering someone is not necessarily going to change their mind. So will the court decide that, whether this is discrimination based on sex? Will that be part of what this court decides?
Well,
or is it? That's the what you call it, the issue, the question presented.
It's the crux of it. Yeah.
Is the state's ban on these procedures for minors a violation of the Equal Protection Clause? And the answer should be no, it is not, because this is not a suspect classification. Age, you just need a rational basis for restricting it. And
what do you think they'll do? Because you've listened to, I don't know if you listened to all of it, but you know enough about what went on Wednesday. And there was one, the questioning, and we've got an article about it, about what Alito did. Rod Dreher calls it Alito's kill shot.
Yes.
And so, I guess the question would be whether transgender identity is immutable. He was asking that question of this ACLU attorney, Mr. Strangio, who's really a woman. And he couldn't answer it. He first said that it was immutable, but then after Alito asked a couple more questions, he couldn't say that it's immutable.
Well, but that's because it isn't, right?
Yeah.
Like you change it all the time, right? And they've always said, well, this, you may feel like this one day and this another day, right? So there was another exchange as well, very similar to that. Well, where the lawyer can't answer a question about the suicide rate you guys were talking about earlier.
Couldn't do that either.
Because this lawyer woman was asked directly, well, this says that there is no evidence that allowing minors to take these kinds of procedures and medical procedures will prevent them from committing suicide. And the answer was no, there aren't any, but it probably does help with suicide ideation. Then it's like, well, it doesn't help with that either. Well, I mean, do you know what I mean? There's nowhere to go. There's nowhere to go because the research, and they've spent so much time lying to the public that when you get in front of a judge who is dealing with facts and figures, they don't know how to talk like that anymore.
Yeah.
They don't know how to have logical conversations about this.
It's all about semantic confusion and all those kind of things.
That's right. Go ahead.
And you think about Dr. Paul McHugh. Remember him? He was at Johns Hopkins University. He was head of psychiatry. And, of course, he's vilified now because he said this isn't working. You know, it's supposed to reduce suicide, and it's not reducing suicide, and all of those kinds of arguments and all the rest. Since we're coming to break, you raised a good question I thought just would put on the table for a minute, and that is the case that you dealt with where the state could take your daughter, your son away from you. I was thinking of Tim Walsh. Remember Tim Walsh? Well, I've got this in front of me here from this is an NPR, so you know it must be true. Tim Walsh State has become a trans refuge, and what that means in Minnesota, what it means in California and places like, does it not, Keisha, that if indeed I am, say, a 14-year-old and I want to transition and my parents won't let me, I'll find a way to get on a bus or an airplane, go to that state, and they will then say, I will be in loco parentis for you and allow you to transition. So what's at stake here is the fact that some individuals that want to go through a transition of some sort might flee to another state unless the Supreme Court rules effectively on this.
Yeah,
True?
absolutely. And the other thing is, you know, the parents having knowledge of what's happening, and, you know, these activists who will take your child and brainwash them and then, you know, tell them that they need to leave the state in order to do these things. So, I mean, this is just a very, very sinister situation. And I'm hoping that the Supreme Court will at least put, you know, a lock on this part of it, because doing this to our children is something I think this country is going to end up paying for if we don't stop very soon.
Well, so many states have been smart enough to pass these laws. And that, to me, that's what's egregious here, is the idea that the Biden administration would come in and say, you can't have a law that protects children in this way. And so, you know, I mean, we're all saying it has to go the right way, but then you wonder, you know, has our culture bought into the language, the changes in the language and in definitions, and does the emperor really have no clothes? And so, you know, it's just going to be interesting to see what the court does. I'm not even sure about all the conservative justices here in this particular case.
I'm not either, but, you know, I'm a hard sell when it comes to that kind of stuff, because I don't believe Bostock was decided correctly, so I think Gorsuch was completely wrong there. But we'll just have to see how it goes.
Well, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, how about a few other topics? DEI, as well as some of these Trump nominees. Of course, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Many of the articles we're talking about on the website. We'll be right back.
Not to worry. And yet, there is a lot of worrying stuff in our world today. Thankfully, the Bible doesn't stop at telling us not to worry. God gives us a next step. He says we need to pray. But sometimes even knowing what to pray can be difficult, and that is why Point of View has relaunched our Pray for America movement, a series of weekly emails to guide you in prayer for our nation. Each week you'll receive a brief update about a current issue affecting Americans, along with a written prayer that you can easily share with others. We'll also include a short free resource for you in each email so you can learn more about the issue at hand. Will you commit to pray for America? Go to pointofview.net. Click on the Pray for America banner at the top of the page to subscribe. Again, that's pointofview.net. Click on the Pray for America banner. Let's pray together for God to make a difference in America. Point of View will continue after this.
just wanted to tell you, too, how much I have appreciated Point of View over the years. I've always been taught that we take care of our own, and I feel like Point of View is one of our own because of the Christian worldview that you do promote. And so I have become a partner today, and I just want to thank you so much, and just God bless you for all that you do.
Listen, I wanted to make a quick comment. I'm a relatively new listener to the show, and I really kind of stumbled upon it more than anything because I'm doing some driving now that I wasn't in the past. And my comment really is, I think you guys and gals are more right on about the assessment of this country right now than anything I've heard. You know, I go home and I tell my wife, you've got to hear what they're talking about on the show. It's just so right on. And I tell my parents the same thing.
I'm 25 years old, and I started listening to Point of View about 4 years ago, and it has changed the way that I think and the way that I view the world around me.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, we have in studio with us today Keisha Russell as well as Penna Dexter. And if you would like to join with us, again, probably the best way would be to go to the website, pointofview.net, find some of the articles. If you want to leave an email, certainly that is available as well. And some of the books and resources we're talking about here, I would highly encourage you to get a copy of. I mentioned a few of those this last hour in terms of transgenderism. Even this hour, we'll get into a few other issues of wokeness and the rest. And those are resources we'd love to put in your hands. This hour, I thought we'd talk about, at least get some comments around the table about the Hunter Biden pardon. This is an article by Cal Thomas. A little bit later, we'll talk about some of the nominees. And before the hour is up, what about this idea of DEI and wokeness? And that has been significantly changing. But Penna, your thoughts. We've already made some comments this week, but I'd love to get both of you to maybe address this issue of, first of all, President Joe Biden saying, I'm not going to pardon my son, and then he pardons his son, and that flap alone began a whole lot of questions, but also why such a broad pardon that doesn't just cover the last few days, but goes back almost a 10-year period, which in the article by Cal Thomas suggests that maybe there's something to this idea of the Biden crime family. So what are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, the lying about not only from President Biden that he would not pardon his son, definitively really said that, but then it went across the administration that people would then pick up on that and say he won't pardon his son. And he did pardon his son. And the fact that he just decided over the Thanksgiving weekend, it's just another one of his lies, as I doubt he had any intention to pardon his son. And I thought Cal Thomas, in the article that we posted at pointofview.net, did a good job to talk about this. First of all, he did this to protect Hunter Biden, of course, and now that we've got Kash Patel going in as FBI director, and it sounds like that is going to happen, he's got the support in the Senate, that he needed to protect his son from the FBI looking into and going after Hunter. But there's so much about the Biden family, the sort of the crime cartel of the Bidens, that Mr. Comer, Representative Comer of the House Oversight Committee has been investigating for months. And I thought that Cal Thomas did a good job of talking about how Biden needed to do that not only to protect Hunter, but also to protect himself and his family. Mm-hmm. And so, it was just, he had to do this. Goodbye, I'm leaving office, and I'm going to protect my family.
Well, and again, for people that say, wait a minute, you're being too unfair about all the investigations and all the rest, I would recommend a couple of books by Peter Schweitzer, who's been on the program many times before. Matter of fact, the other day, I actually talked about 3 different books that have come out over the last couple of years, and each one of them had Joe Biden on the front cover. So it's an illustration of the fact that when you talk about China, when you talk about Ukraine, it's amazing how many times Hunter Biden and Joe Biden show up in that particular conversation. But some thoughts about that, Keisha?
Yeah, I mean, my initial thought was liar, liar, pants on fire. But I don't think anyone ever thought that he wasn't going to pardon his son. I don't think anyone ever believed that. So I just don't understand the utility of that lie. I suppose because of what was going on with Donald Trump at that time, they had to look like they were upholding the rule of law. But here's the problem. They've lied so many times to the American public that I don't really think President Biden had any issue with it, because at all the lies that were told during COVID about the vaccine, about masks, about all those things. And now I think they're just so brazen about their lies and about breaking their promises that they just don't even care anymore, because they don't think the American people, or the media especially, are going to hold them accountable. And thankfully, there are some Democrats that have been talking about it and saying, okay, this is too far. You said you weren't going to do this. You said it over and over again. And now you're doing it. But they really should have been calling Biden out and his administration out for many, many years now, and haven't.
What about what's kind of in the news today about people, other pardons being issued
Seems
with regard
like that's
to
coming.
folks in the Biden administration, or people that have been friends of Joe Biden, like Liz Cheney, Adam Schiff, other people that been players in really going after Donald Trump. So they kind of worry now that maybe a Trump FBI will go after them in the same way. I don't know if it would or not. I don't know if they're going to waste time and energy on that, but if they did, they want to make sure these people are protected. But that would really, really be a legacy destroyer, I think, if there was just broad pardons. I think already the pardon of Hunter Biden is a legacy destroyer.
I don't know if he cares about that, though.
Yeah.
Maybe not.
Maybe he did it to destroy the Democratic Party. I mean,
it almost
maybe
seems
he's
like
just,
it.
Maybe he's just really angry about what they did to him.
They
I mean,
kicked him out.
That's one of the theories out there.
They shivved him and threw him off the bus, right? And then said, we don't need you anymore. And so maybe he's like, you know what? I'm just going to protect me and mine, and I'll see you guys later. Now, it doesn't demonstrate very much integrity, but I don't really know if that is something that we expected from him anyways.
A book I've been reading lately by Glenn Beck is called Propaganda Wars. And the reason I made laugh so hard is on the third chapter, he talks about how you can evaluate whether people are telling you the truth. And the first one is the liar test. And the argument he makes is a very good one. When people have been lying to you so many different times, then you actually have to raise the bar for even greater scrutiny before you believe them. And one of the examples he uses is when all of the media and 51 former or present members of the government in the intelligence community said that Hunter Biden's laptop had all the marks of Russian disinformation. That gets into that whole issue. But he gives you 7 different categories of how to evaluate whether somebody's telling you the truth. But the premise of the book, and he takes you through the lying industrial complex and all that, is, as you just said a minute ago, Keisha, they've been lying for so long about so many different things. And it's the virus. Well, it obviously came from the animal mark, the wet mark. It didn't come from the Wuhan Institute for Virology. And the virus will keep you from getting COVID, and on and on and on. The American people don't even tend to believe them anymore, as evidenced by the election. And so it's kind of like, well, we just keep lying anyway. What do we have to lose? And it's almost like lying has become such a normal part of the administration that they aren't even embarrassed. They have virtually no shame about lying.
That's how it seems to me, too. Like, I don't think they even care. They're not really answering the questions about why they think it's okay to do this now. And his flimsy response about, my, very privileged son is being, scapegoated, and it's not fair, and he's being treated unfairly.
Throwing the Justice Department under the bus?
When it's his Justice Department, I mean, just give me a break already. Like, the whole thing is just ridiculous. He could have just said, I changed my mind, and this is what I want to do. And that would have been a better excuse, even though we know you didn't change your mind and you were going to do it anyway.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to get you both of your comments, and if you want to have some more after the break, fine. But also, I wanted to move on to some of these nominees, because this was interesting, Penna. We'll come back after the break. Guy Benson points out that even though there's all sorts of hand-wringing there in Washington, D.C., most Americans are pretty good with the people that Donald Trump's put forward. So we'll talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
The Western world is facing a birth rate crisis. Wilfred Riley says that these young adults resemble captive panda bears who must be persuaded to mate. He cites a psychological study that revealed that roughly 50% of young men have never or almost never approached a woman to ask for a date. Even if men and women get married, they are less likely to have children. The fertility rate has been dropping for decades. That is why Edward Ring wrote a discouraging essay, "Give Me Fertility or Give Me Death." Turns out that unmarried, childless women are much more likely to vote for a Democratic candidate who supports abortion as reproductive health care. And a recent study by Morgan Stanley estimated that by 2030, around 45% of women between ages 25 and 44 are projected to be single and childless. And it's more important to recognize that these trends are not only taking place in the developed world, but much more even in the developing world. The U.S. has a fertility rate of 1.84, which is better than the 1.24 fertility rate of European countries like Italy or the 1.17 fertility rate of Singapore. Some liberal women have embraced the 4B movement that originated in South Korea that says no to sex, dating, marriage, and children. This is not a good trend. The projected fertility rate of South Korean women this year has dropped to 0.68. The population of South Korea is imploding. So it's time for pastors and other church leaders to remind Christians that children are a gift from God, Psalm 127, and they are arrows in our quiver. You know, the secular world may not value marriage and family, which is why the church must teach biblical principles to the next generation. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on a biblical view of anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism. Viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, of course, we were talking about this idea of the pardon. Certainly, if you have some comments, you can let us know. But I thought we would maybe focus on now some of the Trump nominees. We will, of course, get into more of the specifics probably next week. But what I thought was so interesting, Penna, is that Guy Benson reminded us that even at a time when there's a whole lot of controversy inside the Beltway in Washington, D.C., and there are some senators not sure they're going to vote for Pete Hegseth and a variety of other individuals, maybe even Robert F. Kennedy Jr. If you poll the American people, and I was struck by this poll, first of all, I can't imagine somebody sitting down and saying, okay, do you have favorable or unfavorable comments about Marco Rubio, Robert F. Kennedy, Mike Huckabee, and Tulsi Gabbard, all the way down this list, but they do have that. And what's so striking is that at the top of the list are some of the ones I just mentioned. mention who are favorable. And even the ones on the bottom of the list, we mentioned Scott Turner the other day when we had Jack Graham in studio and some others.
Who people don't know.
Again, 41% just don't know them.
Yeah.
So it's not like they have unfavorable. They just don't know who they are. And so it seems to me that the bottom line is that even with some of those so-called controversial appointments that have been made by Donald Trump, Pam Bondi or Tulsi Gabbard or Robert F. Kennedy or whatever it might be, Pete Hegseth, still the American people are saying, yeah, we feel pretty good about the transition. We feel pretty good about some of the people that Donald Trump has actually nominated.
Yeah, I mean, looking at this chart, I guess in politics I've always gone with the idea that a president pretty much should get his cabinet, and that unless there's a reason. But I thought that during the Bush years, President Bush, when he ran, especially the second time, he elevated certain people he was going to appoint in order to get elected.
Yes.
Trump didn't do that. But once he was elected, then you started seeing these names. I mean, I think Trump used the court issue maybe the first time to his advantage. But this time, it is interesting. But so I'm not really surprised that people approve of these people, even if they know them and they already love Marco Rubio or whatever, then they're going to approve. But I think, Trump, he was elected. He actually was elected by a little bit more of a lopsided majority, even winning the popular vote. And so the attitude of the country, I think, is let him have his nominees. And I even see that because I started hearing things about Pete Hegseth for Secretary of Defense. And so, I'd heard some of those things too, but I also know that he's a godly Christian man and, he's asked forgiveness for some of his past. And so, so I looked at that and I was favorably disposed because I think he can go in there and clean out the Defense Department and some of the wokeness that's really, really damaging. So I think he's a great nominee, and I think a lot of Americans are kind of thinking that way.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know much about Pete Hegseth other than what I've read, right? Mm-hmm. But I think that, look, there are a lot of people who want these positions, and so if there's any sort of mark at all where you feel like the Senate is not going to be in favor, I'm sure he's got plenty of people who are second, third, fourth, fifth, and happy to be those choices. So my belief is that, Donald Trump may not get all of them, but I think he'll get most of them. And even if he doesn't get every single person he wants, the runner-up will still be great.
So do you buy? Because I've been hearing a lot of people say if Pete Hegseth doesn't make it through the Senate, or doesn't even he drops out under pressure or something, that's not good for the other nominees that are going to come before the Senate. I've been hearing that today a lot, and so that's why Pete himself, he needs to make his own case that he's trying to do right now, and Trump needs to stay behind him. I don't know. What do you think about that?
No, I think that is the best opportunity. I think that's exactly what should happen. I'm saying if it doesn't happen, if the Senate doesn't, nominate him, I don't necessarily believe that he shouldn't be, but I do think that just in case anything goes wrong there, that there are a lot of great people in our movement that can help fill these roles. So
yeah, I think the requirement for Donald Trump is, will he clean out the swamp in whatever area of government it is?
Mm-hmm. Let's come back to the point you made a minute ago that most Republican senators have said, even though we may disagree with Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, certainly Joe Biden, we think that the president who is elected should be able to have his, or maybe someday her, actual appointments. And so the Republicans have generally gone along. What's so interesting is Democrats haven't always.
No.
I can take you all the way back to 1981 when you had a sitting senator from the state of Texas, John Tower, who was nominated to be Secretary of Defense, and he was not confirmed. Now, you think about what that takes. That took a lot of Democrats and an occasional Republican to go along to actually take an individual, because you think about this, your senators are voting against a person who is one of your fellow senators, and that always seemed to go the other direction.
And wasn't it Dick Cheney that ended up Secretary of Defense then?
Yeah, and so that, of course, we know all of the other stories, but the point is this time Republicans, who most of the time have said, well, we're willing to give Joe Biden or Barack Obama who they pick, where there's a number of senators this time saying, well, we're not so sure about Pete Hegseth. And so it's kind of interesting because we've always had the philosophy that if you win the election, then they should be able to pick the people that they would actually want to put in those positions. And one of the lines of Barack Obama is, hey, I won the election, so, take it up with the electorate because they put me in office. But I don't see the Republicans willing to do that this time on some of these.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Sometimes the background is hard to know, though. On the story about the relationships between some of these people. Those are things that we don't know and probably are never going to know. And so I think that's part of what's going on here is that.
Well, here's one question about relationships, and that is you have a U.S. Senator right now that's been questioning Pete Hegseth.
Yes.
Joni Ernst.
She sure has.
Of Iowa. And she has been a name that's been floated for that position. And now she and some other, I think Susan Collins, some of the females in the Senate are, they're not committing one way or the other. And the other part of that also is that Joni Ernst herself, I don't know that she's all that conservative. I mean, she's a conservative, yes, but there have been times when she's disappointed the conservatives, and I'm not sure she's the one that would actually go in and clean out the wokeness. Because she sees Pete Hegseth's opposition to females in many combat positions. She sees that, I think, as a problem.
Well, another one I just thought I'd put on the table is the most popular one on the list is Marco Rubio. The third most popular one is Mike Huckabee.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was kind of interesting because we also, on Monday, when we had Jack Graham here, talked about what could happen in Israel, because up until recently, the possibility of having, say, an extension of the Abraham Accords or maybe something that would be beneficial to Israel was off the table. But with a Marco Rubio and a Mike Huckabee, by the way, Mike Huckabee is the first individual, non-Jewish individual, to be an ambassador to Israel. Is there not a possibility that something else could happen in the Middle East?
Well, I think that's been Donald Trump's plan also from the beginning, was to get more countries, for instance, Saudi Arabia, into the Abraham Accords. And so, yes, I think it's a nomination that pleases the right and pleases Christians and, fans of his daughter, who is press secretary. But it's also strategically a good nomination to get some things done with regard to peace in the Middle East and trade and all of that.
Well, we'll see how many of these get confirmed. But again, if you haven't seen it, I'll just show the chart up there for those of you watching online. But you can find this article. It was striking to me because it illustrates again that sometimes all the controversies taking place inside the Beltway really aren't that controversial. And in particular, Pete Hegseth, you've got some interesting comments from Will Cain, who said, I'm the guy who sat next to him for 8 hours every day for 5 years, starting at 6 a.m. Then Rachel Compost Duffy said, now you have two people that sat next to him for 8 hours a week. So these are individuals that are saying, NBC, this is just a hit job. We don't agree with the things you've said. And so we'll see how much of that weighs in on the nomination.
Will Chamberlain also commented on the Biden statement. I also believe raw politics has infected this process and it led to miscarriage of justice. Well, Chamberlain says President Trump should just copy-paste this sentence into every one of the pardons of the J6 defendants.
And maybe even a couple of those pro-life individuals that are serving time, and one of those that did the Silk Road and the whole issue of Bitcoin. So we'll see what kind of pardons come down. But let's take a break. We've got a lot to talk about in terms of DEI. Good article and a very good commentary by Penna Dexter. All that coming up right after this.
It almost seems like we live in a different world from many people in positions of authority. They say men can be women and women men. People are prosecuted differently or not at all, depending on their politics. Criminals are more valued and rewarded than law-abiding citizens. It's so overwhelming, so demoralizing. You feel like giving up. But we can't. We shouldn't. We must not. As Winston Churchill said to Britain in the darkest days of World War II, never give in, never give in, never, 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 never yield to force, never yield to the apparently overwhelming might of the enemy. And that's what we say to you today. This is not a time to give in, but to step up and join Point of View in providing clarity in the chaos. We can't do it alone, but together, with God's help, we will overcome the darkness. Invest in biblical clarity today at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again in studio with us, Penna Dexter, Keisha Russell, and we are going to talk for a while about this issue of DEI for a couple of reasons. First of all, Daniel Cameron, who served before as the Attorney General of the state of Kentucky, he's the CEO of the 1792 Exchange. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. Walmart says goodbye to DEI, and I put that one together because Penna Dexter's commentary today is called DEI Diminishing. If you go to the website, pointofview.net, you'll find both of the articles. And if you click on especially the picture that we have associated with Penna Dexter's commentary, Karen put this up, and it shows this long list of various companies that used to really buy into DEI who have now backed off of that. And Penna, the first one, let's go to Daniel Cameron's for just a minute before we get to yours, because I thought that might be good to mention why this happens. And of course, if you want to read about this in some detail, I might mention the book by Vivek Ramaswamy. Remember when I first mentioned his name, people said, how do you even know to say his name? I said, well, you're going to be hearing from him. Of course, he ran for president. But also, a number of years ago, I was actually at a shareholders meeting for ExxonMobil and actually sitting behind the individuals with the Human Rights Campaign. And they were at the time lobbying because I think ExxonMobil was the only one that did not have some of these various LGBTQ kinds of provisions. And as a result, they have been many times developing what's called the Corporate Equality Index. And as a result, Walmart finally said, you have encouraged us to fill out these forms. We finally decided we're not going to fill out the survey anymore. Tell us more if you might.
Yeah, the survey is part of the Corporate Equality Index, and I call it a shakedown because it's really to try to get these companies, and it's been going on for decades, a couple of decades at least, to be part of this woke corporation club. And are you filling these requirements? And the requirements get more and more woke. They get more and more pro-trans. They get more and more your one race is oppressors, one race is the oppressed. They get much more into quotas for hiring certain classes of people. And so, and they, these corporations that are meant to please their stockholders and to make money, they're placing their emphasis not on that. And it's starting to show in their financial statements, and their shareholders are not, some of them are okay with it because they're woke too, and others are not happy with it. And so, so this is what Walmart did. Walmart did was actually made the decision to pull out of this Corporate Equality Index. It did a lot of other things that it decided to do to lessen the influence of DEI in the company. But this is probably the biggest one that they would do that. And so they're really, a giant in America, as is Boeing, which we'll talk about later, who's having Walmart's a healthier company, but they can see the writing on the wall, as can a lot of other companies that you mentioned that are pulling out now of the whole DEI agenda.
I just typed in DEI on our search engine here at Point of View. 150 articles pop up,
Wow.
Some by Penna, some by myself, and many others that we've posted over the years. And when you type in DEI or then ESG, which stands for Environmental, Social, and Governance, DEI stands for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, you just have so many of these woke ideas. And I thought might just come to you, Keisha, because in some respects, this isn't your field per se, but it's amazing how many times your religious liberty issues that you've been dealing with, people working for Alaska Airlines, people working for various companies, have come face to face with these DEI requirements as well, haven't they?
Yeah, absolutely. We had a client who posted some questions about how the Equality Act would impact people of faith, and she was fired for that. So I think what's happening, though, also is that, the election results really told a tale about what people think about this stuff. And I think that's important for corporations to pay attention to it. I think they've waited a bit long to do that. And even Disney has tried to kind of backpedal from what it was doing, even though I think the content is still going to be very progressive with Disney. I think they're just trying to win back that conservative audience and the people who want to go to Disney World and all of those things who don't want to do that anymore. And so they have to backpedal because I don't know if you remember this, but Michael Jordan was asked a long time ago to support a Democratic candidate in Chicago. And he said, why? Republicans buy shoes too. And people were very upset about that. But it's true. Why would you alienate half of the people who support you?
Yeah.
Yes. It's gone from affirmative action to DEI, and it's become, I guess they just add more and more rules, more and more things that you have to comply with that have nothing to do with serving the public that you're out there to serve and making a profit.
Yep. And again, that's part of it, the old moving the goalposts, as we used to talk about. But back to the point that Keisha made just a minute ago, over the years, we've talked with people like Tim Wildman of American Family Association. And of course, he's, the host of American Family Radio, in which he many years ago said to Home Depot and Lowe's and some of them, just get out of the culture wars. Yes, we would like you to be on our side, but it makes absolutely no sense that when somebody walks in to get a hammer or a lawnmower or some nails, that they're confronted by all this woke stuff that actually caused some of them to do a 180 and walk right back out of the store. Why are you doing that? And the only thing we could come up with is when you're a major company, you can get away with that. Just imagine if you get a plumber that comes to your house because you've got a leaky faucet, and he walks in and sees that you've got some Trump paraphernalia and says, well, I'm just not going to serve you because obviously you and I disagree.
What do you mean, like FEMA?
Oh, that one's a good one, too. That's the problem, that, you can get away with this if you're the federal government, FEMA. You can get away with this if you're Walmart. You can get away with this if you're BlackRock, although they're turning their back on ESG as well. But if you're a small business, you cannot get away with all this woke mentality. Talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have to cater to your audience and to the people who are supporting you, and you've got to know that most of these people are not going to want to see this nonsense in your store. Target, that's a huge company, but you remember they had to backpedal off of their display of all the LGBTQ stuff in the children's section.
You mean the chest binders?
Yeah, that's all right. So I just don't understand why you would even hop on this bandwagon. And I guess I understand it's social pressure. That's what does it for pretty much everyone. But I'd like to see some of these corporations develop a backbone.
Yeah.
With regard to Walmart, there was a former CEO of Walmart, Bill Simon, who he was in Congress also, and he's been looking and speaking about the DEI direction of Walmart for a long time. And he said he's so relieved now that Walmart is making these steps and this turn. And he says he used the words, let's get back to running a business.
And again, I was just thinking as we're coming to a break that we broadcast all over the country, but I'm thinking about some of the radio stations that we have right there in the Midwest. One of those that's backing off is Caterpillar. Well, that's right there next to where WPEO is. And then we've got John Deere. They're backing off, and that's one over there in of course, the border basically in Iowa, because I've been to a lot of these places over the years, and Tractor Supply and those. You can kind of get a little bit of an idea why Boeing up there in Seattle. When we come back from the break, I want to talk about your commentary there. But Walmart is right there in Arkansas, right next to one of our stations there. You just, after a while, just say, you're actually not doing a real good job even relating to the community in which your corporate headquarters are. And so it makes sense that eventually there will be a few people in the company saying, I really don't think this is a good idea at the next board meeting. Let's just see if we can back off and no longer fill out this survey for the human rights campaign.
You had to turn the ship somehow to because anybody that would say that this is stupid, this is dumb, even though it's very obviously stupid and dumb and not, not what a company should be doing. But somehow the left was able to, I think, win over the language, win over the agenda for a time. And it's probably going to take a long time to turn around the Titanic with regard to DEI, but it's starting.
I might just mention, for those of you that want to go and check out some of the commentary, of course, we're going to talk about Penna Dexter's commentary because you'll be able to hear it right now, DEI diminishing. But a week before, she had one, Clothing the Emperor, and we're talking about the Emperor's new clothing. And the bottom line is, just as that famous story of Hans Christian Andersen, the Emperor has no clothes, you needed a child to bring a little bit of perspective and common sense. Apparently, there are some people in some of these boardrooms are saying this does not make sense. This is a way to basically Bud Light your company. That's one illustration I might use. Or Jaguar's the latest one with their commercials. But we'll come back and talk with Penna about her commentary right after this.
The troubled Boeing company got a new CEO in August. Early on, Kelly Ortberg began winding down DEI at Boeing. DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, has been around for decades. Diversity requires the elevation of immutable differences like race, age, ethnicity, religion, gender, and sexual orientation. Equity, often mistaken for equal opportunity, emphasizes equal outcomes. In favor of achieving these, employee merit is necessarily de-emphasized, and therein lies the seed of DEI's failure. After the death of George Floyd in 2020, Fortune 500 companies launched or beefed up their DEI initiatives. But when companies that build things take their eye off the ball, quality suffers. For Boeing, 2024 brought massive problems, including the mid-air separation of a panel from an Alaska Airlines plane. A Boeing insider told documentary filmmaker and writer Christopher Rufo an organization can prioritize excellence or diversity, but not both simultaneously. That's why Kelly Ortberg quietly dismantled Boeing's DEI department. Another American corporate giant, the country's #1 employer, Walmart, announced it is abandoning DEI. The Washington Stand reports that when DEI warrior Robbie Starbuck began investigating Walmart's policies, company executives reached out to him. The company has announced it will no longer participate in the Human Rights Campaign's LGBT Shakedown campaign, the Corporate Equality Index. It pledged to remove inappropriate sexual and/or transgender products and to cancel racial equity initiatives. Walmart joins a growing list of companies rejecting DEI. American businesses are realizing that the woke DEI agenda is polarizing and stifling for businesses. Some are choosing to return to simply running a business. Chris Rufo affirms a reckoning is underway in corporate America. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let me just mention that you will be able to, if you've been listening on a computer, hear Penna Dexter's commentary. We always play at a quarter to the top of the hour, both hours. DEI diminishing. If you'd like to read about it, it's already on the website. And, of course, if you click on that, you will see that it takes you to a place which has, I think, a very good diagram of some of the different companies that are starting to begin to walk away from DEI. There's also a banner that says, never miss a viewpoint, sign up here, and Penna Dexter's commentary is posted, but actually what we do is we send it to your inbox, mine, Monday through Friday. Penna's on Saturday. But Penna, you take us to the troubled Boeing company, and give us some more background, because they are just one of many companies that are starting to say, this DEI is not helping us at all.
Well, Boeing is troubled for many reasons, not just DEI, but DEI is a big culture changer in a company. And, they had the famous door that came off and a lot of other just parts problems in the company, and cash flow problems, and, they've been sued. And so, that's there. But this new CEO came in to try to save the company last summer, Kelly Ortberg, and he began really kind of quietly winding down DEI at Boeing. And, sometimes when you see DEI, you think about equity. You think about equal opportunity for people, but that's not what equity is. Mm-hmm. Equity is equal outcomes, and sometimes these are done, based on categories of employees. And so it doesn't include merit a lot of times. And, companies need to be elevating the best people in order to produce the best product. And so I think that's the idea of this turn against DEI at Boeing. But one documentary filmmaker, and we've quoted him before, I think you've had him on, Kerby, is Chris Ruffo. Mm-hmm. And he says, an organization can prioritize excellence or diversity, but not both simultaneously. He got this quote from an insider at Boeing. And this insider said, DEI is the drop in the bucket, and the whole bucket changes. It's anti-excellence because it is ill-defined, but it became part of the culture. And so now, they've been successful they got rid of their vice president that was in charge of the whole DEI department. And that's one of the things about DEI is a lot of people are employed to implement DEI, and it becomes very expensive. And so it costs the company that way. One other interesting quote I thought from this insider that Chris Ruffo interviewed was, DEI is lazy thought leadership best practiced by companies in smooth waters with margins large enough to afford the associated inefficiency. Sometimes it's inefficient. In fact, most of the time. And I think that's kind of what leads companies sometimes, is if they're having trouble with their profit margins.
That's right, yeah.
Then, they finally figure out that this is part of the problem, and so they turn around. And so if you're really super profitable, you have the luxury maybe of trying to do this and please the left and the wokesters. But now, maybe necessarily even the companies that are doing fairly well, like Walmart, they're realizing they don't need to please the left or the wokesters. As a matter of fact, most of the country doesn't care about those things. They care about a good product at a good price.
Yeah, that's right. And, DEI is nothing more than like modern discrimination. I mean, there's a quote from a Supreme Court case, and it says the best way to stop discriminating based on race is to stop discriminating based on race, right? Yeah. But when the government gives license to this kind of thing, that's what you're going to see in the culture. And so when you have the president picking a vice president just because she's black, or a Supreme Court justice because she's black and a woman, then you fall into these issues where the American public also thinks this is the way they're supposed to behave, and so it gives license to this kind of thinking, and so the corporations pick it up, the media picks it up, and then you become ostracized if you don't believe in this stuff. But it really is just racist. And in many cases, DEI they're really just promoting the sexual revolution. I have friends who work in corporate companies, and they've been wrestling with DEI for a couple of years. And a lot of them have told me this isn't even about like, okay, we don't have any Hispanic such and such. Let's see if we can find a qualified person. It's really just about indoctrinating the employees about how to treat the LGBT and particularly the T in their companies.
Pronouns, bathrooms, and all of that is part of DEI.
That's really what DEI is about.
One of my commentaries earlier in the week was a quote from another individual that Penna wrote about, Gerald Butler. Best way to right the past wrong of treating people based on the color of their skin is to treat people based on the color of their skin. Just so crazy. But we're just about out of time, and I thought we might mention that we were concerned about Dad's place, and I just went on to First Liberty, and it turns out that the Attorney General of the state of Ohio, Dave Yost, actually has filed a friend of the court brief supporting that and actually trying to stay that decision, that injunction. So when we started out, talked about some of the bad news, I thought we'd end with some of the good news. And if you go to firstliberty.org, you can read all about that, can't you?
Yeah, definitely. And you can follow the case as we're fighting it. We'll also updates of Scrimeti because of the amicus brief we wrote, and plenty other cases that I'm sure will be advancing up to the courts here soon.
And again, one of the ways to keep up to date with you is that you have a First Liberty Insider, FLI, and if you sign up for that, then you get some of the press releases and some of the materials, so you don't have to wait till Friday. But oftentimes, the best way to learn about some of that is on Friday, because I think, Penna, you were here when Kelly said, actually, nobody has heard this yet. We haven't announced anywhere, but he announced it on Point of View. So sometimes the best way to be up to date is to listen to Point of View, but also you can go to First Liberty. And I think that is just a good illustration of some of these really important issues in regard. But as I go around the roundtable, what do you think? Do many of these nominees, do you think they are going to make it to actually serve in the Trump administration? Any thoughts?
I think most of them will. Pete Hegseth, my jury is out on that. But just because, kind of as I watched Donald Trump go through his months and months of persecution and get more popular, I feel like this media, all the things that are coming at Pete Hegseth is making him want to fight for his nomination. And if he does fight for his nomination, I think Donald Trump will also fight for it. And perhaps it will cause some of the U.S. senators to see that he really has the health of the Department of Defense at heart. And we've just been talking about wokeism. It's a huge problem throughout the military and the Department of Defense, and it needs to be fixed. And this is a man that his heart is to fix it. So we'll see.
Yeah, we talked about that with Michael Berry when he's been here in the past.
Yeah, we certainly hope so, because I think he would fix those problems. Our Navy SEALs case is sort of
that's another good illustration.
A demonstration of why we really need that. So certainly hope everything goes well there. But I do know that no matter what, we still won, and that I'm good with that. We still have all three branches.
It will be a good cabinet no matter what.
It would be great. Yeah, I think it's going to be fine. I think it's going to be fine. So I'm wishing Pete Hegseth all the best and all of the rest of the nominees. So we'll see what happens.
We will see. We're just about out of time. Let me just mention real quickly that next week on Tuesday, we'll have a Millennial Roundtable. And, of course, you knew Chelsea, good friend of yours as well. And then, of course, we'll all through the week cover some of that. The next week, Penna will be hosting and sitting here. And I think before we end this month, I think we get Kelly and Penna back in the studio one more time. One last time, Uncommon Courage coming out in January. Just checked it out. You can get it both in paperback and Kindle. Now, you'll get a pre-order, but that's the way to get it as soon as it's hot off the press. And we're going to get you back here to talk about that, don't you think?
Excited about that.
So again, enjoy the weekend. First of all, I want to thank Megan for her help engineering the program. Karen, thank you for sitting in for Steve, producing the program. We'll see you back here tomorrow, right here on Point of View.
At Point of View, we believe there is power in prayer. And that is why we have relaunched our Pray for America campaign, a series of weekly emails to unite Americans in prayer for our nation. Imagine if hundreds of thousands of Americans started praying intentionally together on a weekly basis. You can help make that a reality by subscribing to our Pray for America emails. Just go to pointofview.net and click on the Pray for America banner that's right there on the homepage. Each week you'll receive a brief news update, a specific prayer guide, and a free resource to equip you in further action. We encourage you to not only pray with us each week, but to share these prayers and the resources with others in your life. Join the movement today. Visit pointofview.net and click on the banner Pray for America right there at the top. That's pointofview.net. Let's pray together for God to make a difference in our land. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I do appreciate Point of View and what you folks are doing. You really are doing a great job to educate and to help Christian folks do a better job to honor Christ in all that we do.
My husband and I are your supporters. We just really appreciate the show and the people you bring on.
I just want to commend you guys on your program. I love listening to you.
It's a blessing. Been listening to you for several years. Your program has helped my family see current events and elections and politics through the eyes and the principles of Scripture. And that's been enlightening, and we're trying to pass that on to others.
I want to say, first of all, that I really enjoyed the Millennial Roundtable, and I love the program altogether. I think Kerby is great, and I really appreciate all of y'all, all that y'all do, and the truth that y'all put out.
Hey, great show. Love all your comments and what you're talking about.
Thanks again for what you do.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.